In this video, I'm going to show you how to place the front wheel bearing and hub assembly on this Chevy Equinox. Let's get started. With a 22mm socket, remove all 5 lug nuts and then pull the wheel off. With an 18mm socket, remove the 2 bolts that hold the caliper and bracket assembly onto the knuckle. Leave one on as you undo the other one. Pull both of them out, and now you should be able to pull the caliper off of the rotor with the pads and the bracket and everything. Now to remove the rotor, there's a T30 set screw on the rotor to hold it on. I'm just going to use a punch and punch in on the set screw. This is usually going to help break it free. A lot of times these get stuck. Just hit it a few times. If you have a power tool to help you take this out, that's even better. If not, an impacting screwdriver is what you need so you can easily break this free. Once again, T30 bit. Careful not to break your Torx bit in there. Happens very often. At this point, you should be able to remove the rotor. However, mine is fairly stuck. So I'm going to try to tap it off of here, hit in between the lug studs to remove it. That way you don't damage the braking surface. There we go. Remove the rotor. Now use a 36mm axle nut socket to remove the axle nut. If you don't have a power tool that can do it at this point, you can put a long pry bar between the studs to prevent this from spinning so you can break it free with a breaker bar. Make sure the axle pushes through, which it does for me. If it's seized in the knuckle, take a center punch or a chisel and drive it through, either by hand or with an air chisel. Or what you can do is take the axle nut, put it flush up against the end of the thread so you can hit it with a hammer without damaging the threads, so you can of course reuse the axle. From the backside, you'll see 3 13mm headed bolts that hold the wheel bearing on the knuckle. Let's get those out of there. At this point, the wheel bearing is unbolted, so let's move to the front side and hammer it off. Now I'm going to use a hammer to remove the wheel bearing. Just hit it back and forth. If yours isn't as rusted, it might come off a lot easier. Unfortunately for me, I have to hammer it until it pops off. Slide this off. Backing shield comes with it. Now you'd want to clean this surface up so that when we install the new wheel bearing, it can seat evenly. So I'm going to take a sanding disc and make it nice and flat. Hopefully yours is not as bad and you don't need to do that much. What you need to pay attention to is the fact that this is aluminum and you can easily chew right through it and gouge it, distort it, and make it not flat. That's going to give you problems further down the line, so whatever you do, keep it nice and flat. Once it's clean, rinse it down with some brake parts cleaner to get rid of all the dust and debris. Now apply a thin coat of anti-seize all over this surface, inside and out. Avoid putting it on the ABS sensor, but you want this to stay nice and protected over time so it doesn't corrode like it was before. I also prefer to put some anti-seize on the splines of the axle at this point. Not a lot, I put a little bit too much on here, so I'm going to wipe that off, but this avoids the axle getting stuck inside the hub after it being on there for a long time. Take the backing shield, make sure it's facing the right way. And then the wheel bearing, line everything up. You'll have to move the wheel bearing around a little bit to make it line up with the splines, just like that. Push it all the way in. As I'm holding it on here, I'm making sure that the holes line up, and I'm gonna start in the first one that does. For me, that's this bottom one. As long as you catch 1 or 2 threads on it, it's gonna stay on and not fall off, so you can let go, and then start the other ones in. That one's started. Start in the other ones. There we go. Let's snug them all up. Doesn't matter which one you start with, since they're in a triangle pattern. You're going across anyway, so just start with whatever's easiest. Push the wheel bearing in and snug these up. The torque for all three of these is 74 foot-pounds. There we go. Let's get the axle nut back on. The torque for it is 151 foot-pounds, so if you tighten it up or bottom it out with a power tool, don't make it too tight. That's bottomed out right about there. I'm going to put a pry bar through the studs so it can hold the hub from spinning as I torque it down. 151 foot-pounds. That's it right there. This is a locking nut, so no cotter pin or staking required. I'm going to add anti-seize to the surface of the hub. That way it can prevent it from rusting in the future. You don't want to add too much though, because it will fling out as you drive and as the rotor spins, especially once it goes on and it gets squished. Then it'll get on your brakes and you want to avoid that. Try to avoid getting it on the threads of the lug studs. If you get a little bit on there, that's okay, just wipe it off, but you don't want to get a lot on. That'll alter the torque of the wheels. Now let's install the rotor. I have a new one to put on, but if you have the old one, make sure it's not corroded on the back side where it mounts on the hub. That way it can mount nice and flat. And when you slide it on, line up the threads for this set screw. There we go. I recommend a little bit of anti-seize on the threads of these screws and hold the rotor, thread it on. When you tighten it up, don't tighten it too much. Just a little snug, that's fine. Otherwise it can actually get stuck in here and you'll have a hard time taking it off next time. Now take your caliper and slide it over the rotor. Line it up with the two bolt holes and have at least one of the bolts ready. That way you can start it and let go of the caliper while you start on the second one. With these started, bottom them out. The torque on both of these is 140 foot-pounds. There we go. Let's get the wheel back on. Put on all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up in a cross pattern, and torque them also in a cross pattern to 140 foot-pounds. Double check them. There you have it, job is done.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.